conversation. It's really awkward.
Yeah.
All right, it's recording.
Sweet. All right. Yeah, so I guess we can try this out, Nick, and we've discussed many times in the past the idea of having local meetups with coaches and chatting about training and just having informal discussions about distance coaching and things like that and topics around it. And so we thought now is a good time to do it virtually at least, and sort of just have an informal chat about that. And we could post it later and share it with coaches in the area, and kind of just see where, if we want to continue doing this and bring on other people and develop this into something bigger, perhaps a podcast, something like that. But so I figured we just chat about it and pretty informal, and go from there.
Yeah, I'm definitely down with opening up and allowing coaches to kind of peer into the brain of either of us. I think that's been a big mystery probably with most people is what are the other coaches doing?
And it's always interesting to know what others are doing and why, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's everyone's always looking over everybody's shoulder, and I think I've always been pretty open with the fact that just ask. I'm not a secretive, cryptic kind of coach. Like meets probably aren't the best places to approach me, but I'm definitely approachable other ways. So but
it's interesting. It's interesting that we all come from different backgrounds, as coaches, and I think part of that dictates kind of where we go with coaching. But we often tend to evolve the longer we're in the sport, and depending on who we coach, what setting we're in, and so on and so forth. So how did you get started in the world of coaching?
Man, it's kind of in my bones. I started off, the big secret is I was a speed skater of all things out of Memphis, and did that till I was in high school. I kind of got burned out. My coach, who was my uncle, left for Atlanta and was coaching some skaters down there, and I kind of just was in high school and began to transition into a different chapter of life. And I pretty much lived with my coach, so it was very second nature for me to jump into another endurance sport and then apply what I had learned from there into running. And shockingly, it was just very correlated pretty well. It was a lot of pain tolerance, so that was good.
Yeah.
High school coach was a huge influence with me. Ran all 4 years and did okay. Nothing spectacular, but tried to run in college and had a really interesting, lackluster attempt at that. I found out coaching is always good just because you go to the next level. It was more of hey, here's your summer training, run 80 miles, and if you make it, cool. If you don't, then hey, no hard feelings. And I didn't. Ended up, lots of stress fractures and things of that nature. And I came back, and high school coach said, "Come on board." And that was kind of the beginning of the coaching career. I think it was 2003.
Yeah.
Kind of getting up there.
You went to high school at CBHS, but you went somewhere else before, right? Like you weren't there the whole time?
Well, I was a public school kid up until then, so I didn't know anybody. So I went
so middle school you were public school, and you went to CBHS.
Yeah, Crossroads and Kirby Middle and South. I just decided I wanted to do something different, and CBHS was one of those. I'd like to go there.
Yeah,
until I got there.
Even more so now, with all the nice buildings and things and facilities.
It's changed a lot. But
it's a pretty amazing spot to train. Really, given access to the trails and Shelby Farms, the track, and everything. It's amazing.
Cool,
it's funny you mentioned the whole you went from high school, which you had a really good experience with coaching, and then you went to college, and then coach is sort of like, hey, here's do X amount of miles during the summer, and if you make it great, if you don't, then whatever. That whole sort of pot of spaghetti, throw it at the wall, and see whatever strands stick. That seems like a pretty typical approach. It might have gotten better over the years, but it still seems that still holds true.
Oh man, I think I get a little more frustrated as I do coach, and my handful of runners that have gone to college, go to college, and they come back, and it's double-edged sword. It's a compliment to our program, but it's also frustrating for me because those coaches never reach out and ask what we're doing in order
Yeah.
to create a transition.
Yeah.
In turn, it's probably a 60-40, 70-30 split of 70% of guys keep doing it and 30%, 40% find something to do just because they just, you know, the program didn't either meet their needs or they lost interest, whatever. But a
Yeah.
lot of times it just comes down to honestly quality of coaching, in my opinion.
Yeah. It blows my mind that regardless of the caliber of a college program, that uh, the main recruiting coach in cross country and distance track,
Froze up.
as you might think. Am I back on?
Yep, you're there.
Yeah, it just blows my mind that most college coaches don't ask high school coaches about the kids' background, their training exposure, and of course they'll ask the high school kids themselves, like, what's your training like? But I think the perspective of a high school coach, someone who spent 4 years, with a kid, is much more in depth and potentially sort of perspective, has better perspective than the kid themselves. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, some of the coaches do ask. Obviously, I've had a couple of conversations about high school kids with college coaches, like, what's the progression like, and what's their strengths, weaknesses? Are they coachable? Right, like these kind of questions that are valuable.
Right.
So I like to tell kids, high school kids, to when they talk to coaches, to sort of make sure they at least share their experiences in high school and their progression and whatnot, and at the same time ask the hard questions too.
Yeah, definitely. That's something I've gotten as more experiences I've gathered over the years. That's something I've definitely changed in the whole build up to college. If you're going to be a college runner, is be proactive with it. Um, interview the coach, interview the runners, let the coach know what you've been doing, and see if that fits into their program. And I don't take the approach anymore of, and this may not strike people well, but when a runner comes to me and says, "I want to run college," I used to say, "Find a college that you would be happy with, even if you weren't running." And over the last 5 years, have changed that. It's like you're going to college, and you're picking it because you want to run. Now you're academically driven, but still, make sure that's a program that you are putting yourself in position to be successful with,
Yeah.
because running is such a big part of your life. Don't run; it's going to change everything anyway. So it's that's something I've prepared my runners for. I think a little better, and in turn, I think we've had more runners over the last 3 or 4 years go to college and
Yeah.
make it. So I like to think I have a part of that, but maybe my ego as a coach.
Well, I mean, I think your perspective as a high school coach to give your opinion to high school runners about college, I think has to do with your experience as a high school runner and transitioning to college, and then your experience as a high school coach, having seen all the various situations, right? Like we have similar things or similar ways in how we got started in the sport, which was we were doing different sports. I was playing hockey and a bunch of other sports, and we just had really good high school coaches that sort of motivated us and inspired us to become coaches. But you as a high school coach, as a high school runner, you see your high school coach, how they behave, and you kind of want to emulate that a bit. Be as good of mentors as they were, and teachers. And then you become a high school coach, and having had our experience in running in college, or at least trying to run in college, then you see that perspective as well, which is different. Because now like what's the transition like, and what you do differently. And to me, given my background as a runner and as a coach, is of course you're going to university or college. In Canada we say university because college is something different. But you go to college to go to school, right? You're going to learn. You're going to an academic endeavor. Nowadays, there's so many good programs. So many good schools academically, and so in a way, you're right that I think if you're going to go to a college, of course you pick the school that you like. right? Academically, that makes sense for what you want to do. And then making sure the fit is right athletically. And this is where things become variable. What does a right fit mean? Is it the right coach for you? Is it the right teammates for you? Is it the right location for you? You know, all these things. But I think they all matter. But I would say that given my experience, you know, having and seeing some high school kids transition to college, and they go to a college that, you know, has really good runners, and they might not really think about who the coach is or how they view progression. You know, what's their aim for you as a runner. And so I think really understanding what a college coach expects out of you, and what their approach is. I think that's the number one thing athletically, right, to consider when you transition, especially because in high school you might get so much more attention from a coach, and a lot of high school coaches, you know, don't get much credit. You know, I've always said there's some high school coaches that are way better coaches than many college coaches, but they never get any credit for it, right? Because nobody really cares about high school as much as they care about the NCAA. So it's interesting.
Yeah. In a way, NCAA is kind of the pinnacle of our distance.
Yeah, it's true. I mean,
our distance here in the U.S. for sure.
Yeah.
But and the other thing that I think I did a good job of is when we weren't having success at the college level with our runners, is just like you said, I reached out to college coaches and just began to ask them, what are you looking for? What are you doing? How can I help you?
Yeah.
Help me help you. Because I who were doing well, and the transition just didn't seem to be, you know, maybe I could do something to change things, because God forbid become a better coach if I ask other ones. So that's a habit created for myself over the last 10 years, is reaching out to fellow coaches in downtimes for sure. And right now, it's a good time to reach out to coaches for sure.
For sure. That brings up a good point, you know, in terms of, you know, changing as a coach, right? Like the evolution of your way of coaching, of your way of doing things, approaching every season, you know, like how has that been for you? Like your own evolution as a coach, you know, like, I mean, of course, like some coaches, you know, the old, I've been doing it for 40 years kind of thing, you know, I'll never change. Like there's that approach. And then there's there's other people who just evolve as coaches, and that seems to be a normal thing to do.
I knew a lot of coaches that didn't want to be like, and certainly those were the ones that didn't want to emulate, were the ones that will listen to me, because that's how, well, that's just how I do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. So, starting out, I had a really good influence with my high school coach, Coach Casey. It was a good runner in his own right at Ole Miss, and he didn't coach very long in high school, but his time there was well spent, and he was very influential, and I still talk to him today to bounce stuff off of him. So, early on, I emulated the training we did with him. I emulated some of the strength we did with speed skating, and then as I got more comfortable, I went outside of my comfort zone and looked around, and what is everyone else doing? And of course, there's obviously some Jack Daniels influence in there, just because that's an easy access point.
Right.
You look at successful programs. You look at what Wetmore's doing in Colorado, or Mike Smith is doing at NAU, and try to water it down in some ways, and maybe it fits, maybe it doesn't. And then had a really big influence with a guy named Lyle Knudsen out in Colorado, who really kind of turned my whole coaching perspective upside down. He was very interesting. He was kind of a black sheep in the running world, but he just looked at running from a completely different perspective. He looked at it as, we're gonna train, this system over your cardiovascular in order to make you fast. And it was just a completely different way of coaching, but whether it was right or wrong, we had success with it. But what it did do is it made me open up to something different. Right. And that was the beginning of me becoming a better coach, because I figured out I couldn't do this on my own. I need to learn from others, and need to be open-minded to things that maybe weren't traditionally accepted in my upbringing as a coach. So, I still do a lot of things that he did and things I learned, but I think now what I've done as a coach is, reach out to you and reach out to other coaches, and we look at workouts and go, well, I had this plan, but this looks really cool over here. I think this is
Right.
great. Or we mash things together and all of a sudden everyone's better. Because it's not one way to get to the same point. There's multiple ways to get there. And that's where I think I've become more comfortable is I can look at a kid and look at a team and address what they're good at, what they're not good at. And we don't do the same training every year. We have hallmarks in our training. You know, there's volume progression and there's the long runs, but, you know, learning to motivate them, who they are, has become a bigger part of our program than special magical workouts.
Yeah.
And tailoring that to those runners as you learn about them. But it takes a long time to get comfortable enough to do that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's you know, in the time that I've been involved in track, cross country or running to some extent, you know, I've noticed there's different types of there's the coaches who were high school runners or college runners and, you know, became coaches and continued to apply how they were trained, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've stuck with that. Now, this is typical of younger coaches, it seems, right? Like, you know, just coming out of a system and you're just using that because you're used to it and you're comfortable with it and makes sense. And then there's the opposite of this. Then there's the young runners are like that, and there's the older runners that are like that, but they've been doing that, you know, their entire career, and they've had success, you know, and so that's why they continue doing it. If they didn't, that would just be a bit you know, curious as to why they would keep doing it. So that doesn't work, obviously. And then there's the coaches I think that may or may not have been runners. They may have done something that they were familiar with, but then, you know, seek new ways to approach training and question training. And I think that not only is that valuable for the athletes you coach, but as a person, I think that's such an important aspect of being a coach is being curious and developing as a coach and finding, you know, new approaches or developing new methods, you know, and often, you know, I think this has been said before, but nobody's doing anything different, anything new, right? A lot of people are doing things that seem different, but they're just borrowing things from what's been done in the past, right? Everything's been done in running. I mean, everything's been done in running, like from the craziest, you know, far right to the most basic, far left stuff. Everybody's done, you know, it's all been done. So, you know, at least for me, from an evolution standpoint, you know, I fell in the young coach sort of category when I came out. I thought, you know, I'm going to keep doing this and what I was doing in college, and you know, it made sense to me, right? And even with my exercise science background, physiologically, that made sense. You know, the typical thing where you do, you know, early season, you know, what people call base phase. You know, you do a lot of easy running and you know, slower running, you know, kind of build up your volume, and then
LSD.
And the closer you get to training, to racing, the more intense stuff you do, a little less volume, and sort of the typical periodization approach, and that, and you know, again, physiologically made sense to me, right? And then over the last probably 10 years, you know, you talk to more coaches, you go to, you know, conferences, listen to podcasts, whatever you do, right? Read books, whatever. Talk to athletes, right? The athletes you coach, and they say, yeah, this doesn't, like, they don't respond well. And so as a result, your own experiments, you realize, well, I've been doing this with this kid and it works really well. This approach of, you know, big base phases, more intense sort of competitive and pre-competitive phases. And then others, it works really well. So at some point you got to ask yourself, why isn't everybody responding well to this, right? That's got to be a question that coaches have to ask. Like, you're doing this program and half the runners are responding well, half aren't. At some point, it's not on them, right? It's, you know, it's not their fault, but unless there's attitude issues or compliance issues.
Right.
But if they're all doing the work and half are responding and half aren't, like, that's on us as coaches. Like, we have to find ways to make the kids who don't respond to your training. And so I think for me, that was a big thing. Was I realized, you know, at some point that I can't just keep giving everybody the same type of training. Some kids need more, some kids need less. Kids need to go fast, The kid needs to go a little slower. And once I figured that out, I felt like, one, I was more comfortable in prescribing training, where it wasn't just, all right, on Wednesday everybody does this because this is part of my plan. And so that was big, and for me, in terms of, changing what I do. It's just, most of it was about monitoring how the runners respond, and I find that for us coaches, we need to be paying attention to what's going on with the athletes, and not just say, this is my way of doing it. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, too bad. See you later. That's what frustrates me the most about a lot of high school and college programs. And to some extent, some pro coaches as well, some pro groups. Now, a lot of pro groups have coaches who have been doing it for a while and at all sorts of levels, and are working with the best of the best, right? And so they're getting a lot more feedback from the athletes about, hey, this is what works for me. This doesn't, So there's a bit more. It's a bit more malleable often. But I can't imagine just having the same training for everybody all the time, and being confident and confident in that for my athletes.
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you began to speak about bringing the athlete's opinion into it and what they think works for them, because just psychologically, if they think it works better, then I'm not going to tell them it doesn't work better. If rolling works for you, rolling works for you.
Right.
Placebo effect and confidence in what you're doing is a tremendous part of the program.
Foam rolling, you mean?
Yeah. I'm not going to tell a kid it didn't work for him, because it did.
Yeah.
I think getting the athlete's perspective on this, what it does is it as a coach, I used to view this as a high wire act. If the season didn't go to plan, it's because it was because of me, training that I designed. And now as a coach, it's much more of a team effort. If the season fails, it's a group thing. I take the responsibility, but we get so much more feedback from our athletes now.
Yeah.
And that goes into the whole training plan, and that goes into a more individualized type kind of situation with our athletes. And we're not trying to, cram everybody into what we think is a great training program.
Right.
It's like, you're a circle, you're going into, the circular hole. If you're a square, you're going into the square hole. That has eased my anxiety as a coach, I think, over the years. Is it's made it more comfortable. Like you said, it's all right. How do you feel today? All right, well, we'll go with plan B then. What do you think about that? And I think coaches are uncomfortable I think a lot of coaches are uncomfortable getting input from their athletes, either because of the fear of being I don't want to use the word exposed, but the fear of an athlete thinking maybe he doesn't think I know what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's mostly it, right? That's you. Sometimes coaches, as coaches, we might think we must be confident in what we say,
right?
And we have to be confident in what we do, obviously. But there's times we're like, let's change this for you. It's not because we don't know what we're doing, hopefully, but it's because we are hopefully very perceptive and open to hearing how an athlete, is feeling, and so on and so forth.
Right. We just came off of for example, I make out a very general, I call it a guideline of what the athletes should and shouldn't, should be following. Here's a progression. We'd like you to stick, somewhere in here. Everything's got a plus and minus,
Right.
But we went off of a 2-week cycle where I told the guys in this current situation we're in, guys, design your own training plans for 2 weeks. What do you want to do? What's comfortable to you? And from a coaching standpoint, I got to learn maybe some things that we weren't putting into the training that these athletes really like to do. And
I like that.
And it just kind of gave them, they were accountable at that point too. It also gave me some perspective on how much they've actually learned over the years. And obviously the freshmen are they're new and they don't really know as much, but it forced the athletes to talk to each other. It forced them to kind of get outside of what coach was providing for them. And for the most part, really good response from the guys. They liked it. Some of them are like, I really hope you leave this kind of this element into the training. And I think we will moving forward. I think a lot of times we're going to have a much more, we're already pretty athlete driven, but I think it's going to be even more athlete centered now. now that I have the confidence that they can actually manage themselves, that's the other thing. It's, mother hen
Yeah.
worried about, can they do it?
And I think with like something like that, giving the athletes some responsibility and accountability and a little bit of freedom to kind of play around with their training and come up with ways. I think that's another part that's often underutilized with coaching, is that a lot of athletes just do what they're told. They don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And so giving them some autonomy then also allows them to understand, what's going on, especially if, as you are giving feedback and why or why not, this doesn't work here. And so hopefully, as coaches, we're able to also always explain the why. That's a pet peeve, right? Like, do it because I told you so. Now there are times where, it's like, you don't want athletes to always question what you're doing in a confrontational way, of course, right? But just, hey, coach, I'm curious about this. Like, I just want to know, like, how come we're doing this workout on Monday and then this workout on Wednesday, or whatever, right? Why are things planned the way they're planned out? And I think for athletes, that often gives them like peace of mind to know that there's a plan behind that, and I hope that most coaches do that. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting to see athletes getting autonomy and coming up with their own way of training.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a good change. I think mentally it was good for them, in this time. So it was a
Right.
good learning experience for them and myself. You really learn who
Yeah.
who needs you and who doesn't. And I've often said it's my job as a coach, and I may have gotten this from you, is to become obsolete. I don't want y'all to need me forever. You shouldn't need
Yeah.
me by the time you're a senior, honestly. Uh,
Yeah. I think there's always a need for a coach for a number of little things, of course,
oh yeah,
and a good example I would say of an athlete learning. Often, you want to teach them the whys, so that if they're on their own, like right now, they're on their own, right?
yeah,
It's just odd times, so they have to have the tools and understanding, so that when they are by themselves, they can adapt or adjust a workout, depending on X, Y, Z. So here's an example today. Jackson was doing some mile repeats, and I do this workout with them once in a while, which is basically a good number of miles, like 6 to 7 1 mile reps, but they're off the track. They're typically on either a gravel loop or some pretty gentle course somewhere out at Shelby Farm, somewhere like that, with very little rest. It's basically a slightly harder than sort of tempo effort,
broken.
right? So it's not race pace. It's much slower than that. It's not quite tempo. It's a bit faster than that. But there's 1 minute rest, so it's not much. But it shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't be a workout where you finish like, oh my gosh, that was so hard. That's not the goal of the workout. And today, Jackson's on his own. It's a little warmer in Memphis. I don't know if it's windy or not, but I gave him a massive range of roughly splits for the miles, and I do that because I know he knows that the goal is to go have a slightly harder effort than tempo, not pace, because he knows that paces change depending on the day. And so he texted me after and said, yeah, the paces were a bit slow, but my effort was where it needed to be. And that, as a coach, that's one of those things where you hear that and you're thinking like, all right, that worked. All right, I did my job in the sense that he understands how to adjust and adapt to the session given the conditions. He wasn't feeling good, so he backed off, and the pace were a bit slower. That's fine. Got the work in, got the right effort, and that was it. So that's an example, I think, of that. That autonomy comes in handy in many cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that comes out in that is a younger version of myself. I used to be worried about pace, and I didn't worry about effort. I was worried about mileage, and I wasn't worried about volume. And it's flip flopped for sure as I've gotten older, because no matter the pace, if the effort's correct, they're going to get the stimulus we want them to get out of the workout. And same thing with volume. I think younger coaches are fixated on telling other people, my team just, and so sometimes I tell you what a kid did because I was excited about his fitness, but I used to do it way more often as a young coach where I was like, man, my guys did these amazing mile repeats and they did it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they didn't translate into a race. And I got, why did that happen? Well, they're leaving some of their best workout or their best efforts in a workout.
Right.
And I was
Totally.
trying to cram them into what I thought their pace should have been in a workout.
Right.
And just, had my thumb on everything.
Yeah.
And our kids have done a great job of giving the coach the feedback in order to adjust the training. And then also they've become more comfortable with not hitting paces. They're much more interested in their efforts. And there's days where they turn their watch on, do their workout, and then they turn their watch off, and then they see their paces. But they knew the effort was there.
Right. And what you said just there about
Really hard to teach kids.
Yeah, what you said about, they're not concerned about the paces now as much as they used to be, perhaps. And I think that's a huge thing that's hard to coach, where like you have a kid who might do a workout and you assign paces that you thought maybe would be close, right? Given what's been going on or how the kid's been feeling or whatnot, or the athlete's been feeling. But at the end of the day, some days are just different, and an athlete might feel a way that you didn't expect. And so as a result, the pace will be way slower or a little bit faster, perhaps. But either way, as long as the prescription or the instructions are clear that the goal is not necessarily to hit paces on the dot, but to hit a certain a goal, whether it's an effort goal or a perception goal, that becomes important. I think we can talk about that for a second. You mentioned not caring about paces so much, or even on easy runs or long runs or intervals. Sometimes, of course, there's value in having specific splits in track workouts, for example, where you're trying to get a kid to go through these movements, right? These paces, these splits, given the race that they're trying to run.
Yeah.
But then there's also times where, for easy runs, especially, it's the best when they're called recovery runs, yet there's assigned paces. That I never understood that, even when I was a runner myself. But when you assign paces for everything that's not race specific or things like that, you're making a lot of assumptions, right? So if I always tell people that the human body doesn't come with a one odometer and speedometer, right? Like there's no such thing. We don't know how fast we run. There's not know how far we run. We just know, in simple terms, how disrupted our biology is, right? Mm-hmm. Whether or not our heart rate's too high, or whether the acidity within our blood's too high, or whatever it might be, right? Mm-hmm. So these are the things that our bodies care about, and as a result, when things go bad, we feel bad or tired, or we feel rough or crappy, whatever the term might be. And when things go well, we feel great, and so we can run faster, of course. So I guess an example would be, let's say as a coach, you have a team do a hard session on a Monday or Wednesday, and then the next day is supposed to be a recovery day, right? And but then you say, you know what, go run, I don't know, 6 miles or something, like 10K roughly, and then some runners are going to feel great because somehow they're going to recover faster from the workout. Some others are going to feel bad because they recovered much slower and they're still tired and still have that in their legs. And all of them have that in their legs, have a workout in their legs still for days, right? Mm-hmm. But some of them handle that better than others. And so they go on a run, and often in a group setting, they will all run together, right? Same pace, same distance, so on and so forth. And when in reality, some should probably go on their own, a little slower, right? Yeah. Others, different direction, whatever it might be, because a 6 mile run for a person who feels like crap might take a lot longer if they're actually listening to their body and they're slowing down. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they'll be out there for longer. And that just adds, as you mentioned, to the volume, right? And here, volume, we could use it as sort of duration of training. And if you think about it, if you're out there 10 minutes longer for a given distance, you'll take, however steps that might be, 2,000 steps or something like that, right? 1,800 to 2,000 steps more. And every step is low to the body. And so it really affects runners in a way that is counterproductive. You're trying to get them to recover, yet they're out there longer because the prescribed training was a set distance. Right? It takes longer because you're more tired and so on and so forth. So I always have mixed feelings about mileage versus time, you know,
Yeah.
and especially prescribed paces for recovery runs. If someone says, you shouldn't run slower than 7-minute miles, for example. And my first question is, why? What's the basis for that? Right. That's the first thing is there's no basis for why a specific, pace in minutes per mile would be required on a recovery run. I think the whole point is often counterproductive and sometimes detrimental to certain runners, especially at different times of year. And so that becomes a bit more nuanced, but yeah, I agree with you that looking at things, not putting so much, weight on pace and specific distance covered and so on and so forth. That can be hard to
No, you broke up.
what's that?
It can be hard to what? Sorry.
Oh, it can be hard to change someone's mind on this, right? Especially a runner who's been doing, mileage and mileage and mileage, and then you think, oh, you know what? You're gonna run for an hour today, right? What is that in miles? I don't know. Whatever comes out of it, go easy, and then whatever comes out of it comes out of it. Distance is an outcome, really. So
in the day and age of mile split, flow track, and
Strava,
and all these things that make everything so accessible, and everyone thinks they can replicate what Galen Rupp did, and they'll be Galen Rupp. That still amazes me, but it's difficult as a coach in this era because everyone sees what everyone else does, and it takes a lot to. It says a lot about a program when the kids come in and they have the confidence in the coach because they don't worry about what's going on Strava, mile split, and flow track. I think that's the difference between a culture and a cult. I believe a good culture is you can take the coach out and the program still moves on. A cult, the program dies. But it's very frustrating, and we're doing some Strava stuff right now with MYA just because it's fun to do challenges. But I wish they would take the leaderboard off of Strava because it's just centered around the mileage. And there's these kids that are that are unsupervised doing training right now that are, I'm just sitting back as a coach and really restraining myself from talking to them because I don't feel like it's my responsibility to monitor everyone's athletes.
Yeah, you're right.
Doing things right now. 17-mile long runs, and these are young kids, and I'm like, wow, that's the effect that all these platforms have on these kids because it's just how many miles can I get in? So,
and that goes back to
we don't even speak in miles. We speak in minutes, much like you do. And that's something that catches coaches and other athletes off guard. They're like, well, what's your mileage for the week? And the guys will go, I don't know, but I run about 300 minutes. And that varies. They'll go, what are your long run in miles? They're like, I don't know, it's 70 minutes.
Yeah.
And it really floors people, which
it does. Yeah, no,
it stirs me a little bit.
Yeah, I'm the same boat. Trust me, I've been using minutes for as long as I remember. Whenever I mention minutes, the question is always about how many miles, right? How many miles? And it depends on the day. If you feel good, you're going to run farther because you're going to run faster. If you feel bad, you're going to run a little less far because you feel bad. You just slow down. That's it.
Yeah. But they get the workout. They get the work they need out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you mentioned about, really long runs and high mileage, I think that goes back to, coaching beliefs. And if a coach believes that, high mileage is the only solution, which is nothing wrong with that. If that's,
No.
To me, the big thing about, and we can talk about sort of philosophies and like periodization a bit, but if you think about running volume is obviously important. Putting time on your feet, time on the dance floor, if you will, right? That's sort of an expression I've heard before, but it is important because it makes up like the aerobic component of any middle distance to distance race is is a large proportion of the demands of a race. Even the 1500 of the mile, right? It's 90 to 95% aerobic, if not closer to 95%.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, of course, it makes sense to run more, right? So spend more time running than not. That being said, there's a lot of factors to look at, right? There's the factor of, are you trying to tap out or max out what you can handle in high school? Or are you trying to prepare yourself for college? And then for a select few, are you trying to prepare yourself for a professional career, which is very rare in track and field. And now in high school, you have no idea about that. Like in high school, you could be a solid runner, but not the best of the best, and become one of the best professional runners in the US. There's a lot of examples like that in the US, at least, even in Canada. It doesn't mean that because you've achieved all sorts of accomplishments in high school that you'll be a pro runner. And then, you know, there's so many examples. I was talking to somebody recently, I forget who it was now, about, I asked to name, 5 American runners who were high school studs, right? Who became professional, like high-level professionals. And there's a few, right? Alan Webb's one. Think of Alan Webb. Go back to this, Prefontaine was one. Drew Hunter is one, more recent. There's a bunch of examples, right?
Yeah.
But you kind of have to think about it a little bit. Whereas if I asked name, 15 pro runners who you'd never heard of in high school, and you can start going down a list and you will find people very quickly. And so to me, it's interesting that, and I get it, like a lot of high school kids and high school coaches, they want the immediate gratification of being the best you can be in high school and beating a bunch of high school kids. And, be the best in your whatever division or state or whatever it is. But I think it's important to understand that as coaches, middle school especially, and then definitely in high school, is, man, you got to see the progression. You got to give these kids a chance to at least be able to compete later in college, because they're going to go to college. And the argument is, well, they have to run 100 miles a week in college or 80 miles a week in college. Not everywhere. And that's where doing your homework about coaches and programs is important.
Right.
There are programs where you will do that, but is that the best program for you? I don't know, right? Or is there a program where seniors are running 80 miles or whatever it is a week, but freshmen are just continue on what they did in high school? That's a good program. I like that program, whatever program that is.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the thing about belief in anything, right? So belief in high mileage or whatever you want to call it, is that we always justify it given our experiences. So for example, if I coach one kid and I make him run 70 to 80 miles a week and they win everything, in my mind, this is the best way of training.
Right.
And it'll be very hard for you to change my mind because it worked for me, right? Now, my question is always, yeah, but what if you did something else? It's possible it could have been even better, right?
Yeah.
Sure, they won the Tennessee state champ. Great, right? In the grand scheme of things, though, no offense to the state of Tennessee, any other state could be the same. The same could be said. Who cares? Like, I mean, that doesn't mean that they're the best. It means that they won the current situation they're in. But what if a different program made them even better? And then they could go on and compete at the national level and the international level. So to me, the thing that, well, it worked. I've had a bunch of state champs, and that's the way that it works because I've had success. To me, that's a lazy argument. But I get it because we're so biased and we like to confirm our biases with some evidence that we have, and we kind of plug that away. So I think that's a thing that I think coaching draws, like always step back and look at yourself, right? And look at your philosophies and what you think, like, is it the best way, or is it because I think it's the best way because it worked for me a little bit, or even a lot, but is that the best I can do? Right? That's the question I think that's worth asking ourselves all the time. Is that the best I can do?
Yeah. I had that conversation at the beginning of cross country. We had the guys have done a great job over the last 5 years of keeping themselves relevant in the state of Tennessee. And this year's group was very young, but they were old, but they were young because you had a bunch of junior seniors that have been sitting behind a pretty good group
Right.
for a while. And you know, I had to ask myself if we needed to change some things, and I got their input, and we did. And you know, did they fall short of what they wanted to do? Yes, but did they walk away from the season feeling bad about themselves or throwing pity parties? No, because they progressed so much and believed so much in themselves, and laid such a great foundation for our younger kids that, you know, it propelled them, you know, further than I thought they would ever do. And if you were to ask me, and some people have asked me that, well, you must have been disappointed in the season. I'm like, I'm thrilled with the way we competed and how we ended, and how some of those kids, you know, scratch and claw their way to their best efforts ever. And it really kind of floored them. Well, you only finished this at the state. And I'm like, you know, I don't, you know, I don't care.
Yeah.
I care, but I don't care. Um, you know, and I don't know that I could have said that as a younger coach. Everything's so based off of, you know, where you place in the state and this and that. But for me, it was, what did we need to do, and what did we need to change this year in order to give them the best effort and do, you know, and feel good about it. And those guys did that, and it's a huge credit to them. You know, they fully bought into it. They made it theirs, and we made some changes, and we'll make some changes next year. We tend to make changes with classes. Like if I had a, you know, there's a big sophomore group,
Right.
freshman group, and they're all tracking a little differently because we kind of tweak things based off of what they come in with.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could have done that early on.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, that's exactly what I mean, right? The evolution of coaching is quite fascinating. I think with your guys too, is that one of the things I've noticed that they progress well, you know, from when they come on to when they leave. And so that's the other thing that is misleading in high school, especially cross country, right? Because in high school cross country, if you have a big pool of runners, let's call them, it's basically a big stable, right? You've got a bunch of horses in the stable. It's easy for a coach to stop paying attention to the progression of individual kids,
Right.
Because the team as a whole is doing well.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, you know, you might have a couple of kids who do really well in grade 9 and 10, and then but then they don't progress. They don't get any better. But then you always have these really good grade 9 and 10 kids that come back in. And so as a result, your team is good, but your kids aren't progressing the way they should. And as a result, you know, that's it. High school is the epitome of running for them. And so that to me is sad. That to me is upsetting. That to me, you know, makes me feel like some of these kids who obviously don't know any better. Because, you know, think about when you were in high school. In high school, what if you said, "Hey, coach, I think what you're doing is wrong. I no chance. No, I had no idea. Now because of the coach that I had, I would have felt comfortable saying, "Hey, why are we doing this?" Or what's the point? Not in a confrontational way, but I would have never said, "Hey, I think we need to change the whole thing, right? Like this whole thing, it doesn't work. Like let's start from scratch." So that's why, you know, I think often I feel bad for some really good talented kids who just basically peak in grade 9 or grade 10 or whatever it might be, and that's it. You know, it's you gotta see the individual athlete, not just the team sometimes, and that masks things.
That's very true. And you know, a high number of teams can do that. I certainly could. And I know that was like that when I was in high school. We had 20 guys on our team, which wasn't huge. It's doubled and sometimes tripled now. But there's a few other teams around that did that, and they could afford to do it. But as a coach, I just could never do that. I could probably squeeze more out of some of our athletes, but it just isn't worth it early on. I think it's a huge cop out sometimes, and that may not be, you know, some coaches may hear this and look in the mirror and not like what they see, but I think mileage is an easy way to have some temporary success in a program, and you better hope you have plenty of other kids coming through, because that cardiovascular system is going to evolve, or it's going to change quicker than their bones or ligaments and their tendons, and eventually they're going to run into a tangle of injuries that may or may not unwind them. Who knows?
I mean, that's right.
Ruin that kid's experience, and that's what bugs me. I can't sleep well if I've got a kid that's got a stress fracture, because I'm just studying what he has done and what caused that, you know, make sure that I've done everything I can do in order to make sure that doesn't happen again, A, and then B, how can we get him back as quickly as possible, safely?
Yeah.
That just comes down to an education, you know, learning basic, you know, human physiology and what adapts quicker than the, you know, and what takes longer. And I'd rather take, yeah, early on as a young coach, I probably didn't have the control that I have now, where we can win now.
Yeah.
We may be able to win 2 or 3 of these things if we take this the right way. We may win 1 if we don't. So
Yeah.
well,
you know, what you said just now is absolutely right. And it goes back to the idea that, so yeah, sure. You know, mileage is biggest bang for your buck. You do a bunch of mileage early on. Kids get really, really, really fit.
you're going to get good.
You're going to get good. You're going to get good. Exactly. And as you said, you know, bones and the musculoskeletal system doesn't adapt as quick as the cardiovascular system. So you get really quick, but then the body doesn't keep up, right? So you get hurt.
Yeah.
And so, but then there's always going back to the bias, right? Or like confirming our own bias, which is, oh, this kid is not cut out for it, right? As opposed to saying, what did I do wrong? Did this kid get an injury because of me, and I gave this kid too much, right? Or is it, or is it that, you blame it on the kid and say, they're just not, they can't handle it, so they won't. That's not worth it for them.
Right.
That's scary. And so, you know, stress fractures in runners will happen. Now, if they happen constantly, with very obvious, at least seemingly obvious risk factors, like you cranked up volume to amounts that a kid had never done before, or you have more runs or more intensity sessions or what have you, and then there's a pattern in developing tibial stress fractures or other bone stress injuries, then you might think, maybe that's on me. And then there are times where, you know, a kid will hit a limit. Like physically, they cannot deal with, you know, X amount of minutes or miles or whatever you use. And you have to be able to adapt to that. The other big thing is, and sometimes kids will get injured with very low exposures to training. And then you have to have some understanding of, again, like you said, physiology and what other factors can cause bone stress injuries. You know, is it that they don't take enough calories? They have a energy deficiency, and then they might need to see a specialist or someone to help them with nutrition and so on and so forth. So it's not just training, but when it's a pattern, a constant pattern and recurring issues, then you have to think, maybe I should think about, you know, adjusting what I'm doing with certain kids, especially younger kids, and so on and so forth, and then seeing where that goes. And that takes, as you said, as a young coach, you might not have the introspection to say, yeah, it's probably because of me, right? You might think, there's no way I can be wrong, right? I'm a brilliant coach, and you know, so. But then as you get older, sometimes it's not just age, right? Sometimes it's just exposure and having been around other coaches and having done your homework and having been proactive in learning new things. And so, yeah, I agree with you there that it's just, there are a lot of things that contribute to what might cause a kid to progress or regress or stay stagnant. And I think we have to be open to the idea that it's our fault.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't ever cast blame to the kids unless there's you know, something, unless they're secretly doing workouts, and usually there's a compulsion there, and there's a reason why there is, whether it's a parent, another coach, or a platform, and you gotta address those. I think you gotta be open with these kids these days because they're not stupid; they're very perceptive. They can point a fraud out real quick. You better know your stuff, and you better be prepared to answer the question why. And I don't take offense to why at all. If I'm not prepared to explain a workout, then I'm being reckless. I shouldn't be giving it because it's just because I've read it in Runner's World and I pulled it out of 10 minutes before practice.
Yeah,
we've all done it. We've all walked up to practice, read something up on the fly. Now I'm much more confident doing that now than I used to be, but there's a lot more understanding that I have about runners and their needs. But I think if you can't explain a workout before the kids begin to do it, then you need to take a good hard look in the mirror and just study up. And, can you get an hour better a day? Can you
Yeah.
read something for an hour every day and you're 7 hours better that week? And that's something that I pointed out to my guys. Said, my goal this year is to become an hour better every day. And they didn't understand that, so I explained it and I said, can you be an hour better every day? And they think, well, sure, that's easy. I could be 7 hours better every day. And I'm like, no, just take that hour and accumulate it over 365 days in a
Yeah.
year, and imagine how much better you're going to be at the end of a year.
Right.
And beginning to get them to understand the long-term development of them, so that they're confident that, yeah, they may have came in as the top 1,600 meter kid as an eighth grader into your program. Freshman year, they may only be the 10th freshman in the city, but by the time they're becoming sophomores, they're climbing the rankings again, and they're climbing the rankings in the state, hopefully. But the
Yeah.
long-term approach is very difficult initially, I think, to grasp
Yeah.
as a young
And
coach,
I,
young athlete.
and I think, like, even if you don't know why, right? And there are times where a kid will ask you, not necessarily a training question, but something regarding training. Perhaps it's nutrition, perhaps it's recovery, perhaps it's sleep. Something that was ingrained in me by a high school coach and longtime friend now is that if you don't know why, look it up. Right? Don't lie. Don't make up stuff on the fly.
It's okay.
Making
It's okay to say I don't know.
Yeah, and as long as you're willing to actually learn it yourself and then educate them, much better to say I don't know and then I'll look it up. But if you just say, oh, here's why, and you make a bunch of bullshit about something, it's just doesn't work. Yeah, that's something that you see often. You just see it often, right? Like a lot of coaches are coaches and they've been doing it and they do it, they repeat it. The why often is wishy-washy, and that's a red flag, as you said. Um, you know.
Yeah, I think it's a good leaving point for coaches, for sure. On this is just, even if it's at a basic level, get a really good understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. It don't have to be
Yeah.
fancy. It doesn't have to be complicated. Training itself is simple. The magic really isn't in, a workout. It's the accumulation of all the workouts over a
Yeah.
season or a career, whatever. 4-year Olympic, cycle, 4-year high school cycle.
It's hard to see that for some people, though, right? I mean,
Oh yeah. Well,
it's
now.
so gratifying to have immediate success
Yeah.
that once you have it, it's hard to step back and say, okay, I'm going for the long run now, and I know that
Yeah.
if I train hard now, like this week, uh, that doesn't mean I'll be ready to run fast next week. In fact, opposite, you'll probably be really tired next week, and as a result, you would run slower. Understanding that immediate gains are not real gains. Immediate gains might often can be flukes or the product of something that happened before. But that's tough to convince a kid sometimes, right? When the mentality is now.
Yeah.
Doing hard sessions that don't translate immediately into massive personal bests. It can be demoralizing for a kid, and that's on us to explain the importance of being patient and letting the training adaptations take place so your body can then go faster and harder later on, but not right away. It takes time. So that's tough to teach.
It could be demoralizing for a young coach too. I see a lot of young coaches that just they quit early because things didn't work out the first time. I'll tell you this, and one of my 2-year-olds is screaming, so I'm probably gonna have to leave soon.
Yeah.
Speaking of immediate gratification, there's a 2-year-old that wants something now.
Come here now. Okay, here you go.
My first experience as a coach, and this may be good for coaches to hear, I had to fill the shoes of my coach, and I wasn't ready. He knew I was ready, but I was not ready to replicate what he had done.
Yeah.
Even though I knew all his workouts. This is
Yeah.
goes to show you the workouts don't mean squat, and
Yeah.
there's some substance behind it, or it just doesn't fit that group. Well, we had won region, I don't know, 5 or 6 years in a row, and we'd placed pretty well at state. And my first year coaching with a good group, expectations are high. I'm cocky, which is probably no I'm confident now. I'm not cocky. I can be, but we ended up barely making it to state. And the only thing I told those guys at the end of the season was, I'm sorry, I won't allow this to happen again. This is all on me. It's not you guys. You did everything I asked you to do. Unfortunately, we kept the streak alive with going to state, but I did. I had to buckle down. I could have quit and rolled over and said I suck as a coach. I let the whole program down, but it was a very good hard look, and I was bound and determined to become a better coach at that point. What did we do wrong? What did I do?
Right.
And, and then things got better. It turned around. We jumped back up and win region and do better at state. And then 2 years later, I was fortunate to have a good group for about 4 years, and they progressed with me as I did with them. So that's the thing I'll leave with young coaches, or even older coaches, because you can have a huge downturn in your career later as a coach, and you may leave 5 or 6 years out on the table, and you're just like, I could just be done with it. I've been there too.
Right.
Be patient.
Yeah.
Learn what happened. It happens. The key to that is don't let it happen again, or learn from it so that you can.
And that's often the big missing key, right? That's the key that gets lost somewhere.
Yeah. You don't know it all.
Yeah. Just same thing. I haven't finished off, but same thing is there are times when an athlete's ready, and that everything's, or at least you think, or you strongly believe that everything's been done perfectly, which it's just basically a unicorn in training. And then they don't perform as you expect them to. And, I think probably earlier on when I started, I'd say that at that point I was probably less introspective, and I would have put a bit more blame on an athlete, just suck it up and you're ready for this. Like it's, you don't want it hard enough kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But for the majority of my coaching career, I'd say that it's been the opposite, where when there's a bad performance, I immediately start to be upset at myself and think I need to look back at the training logs. I need to look back at the prescriptions. What did I miss? Like, did I overdo it? 1 week? Did I overdo it the week before? Did I overdo it the week of?
Did we underdo it?
Yeah, I mean, the underdo it is also possible, in at certain times of the year. But often when someone's tired, when it's not that they, there's different bad performances. It could be, say bad, suboptimal, let's say. It could be that they just feel like really bad from the gun. Mm-hmm. In that case, you're thinking like, And sometimes that's just like, yep, that's expected. It's really early season. You've been training really hard. Things are going to feel so fresh. Okay, let's move on. Let's keep training. There'll be a time where you're ready to go. But when it's a time where you're supposed to be, peaking and being the best possible, readiness for a race, and then you feel that way, it's like, oh, I messed up somewhere. I got to find that out, and I got to be better. And so yeah, it's like you said, training's simple, but we can make it complicated because of our own personalities and so on. But I think, I like what you said, the take home is be real patient with yourselves and with your athletes. Makes sense.
Yeah. You never learn anything being right, but you learn everything being wrong. And I've certainly been wrong enough to know enough.
Yeah, that's always a good saying to keep in mind.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate it.
All right, man. Yes, we went a little, I don't know how long that was, an hour. So hopefully the 1 or 2 people who watch it will appreciate it, or at least maybe give us some feedback as to what, if we continue doing this little chat, if we change something, or maybe we can go live even one day and have a little chat room option or something. I don't know.
For sure. But Coach, we'll send this out to you. Give us some feedback. Max and I are not our skin is thick, so feel free to let it loose on it, and hopefully you got something out of it. Yeah. Appreciate your time. Enjoy Flagstaff.
All right, thanks, Nick. Yeah, hold down the Fort Memphis for me.
All right, man. Later.
All right, man. Bye.